Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about books. I haven't talked about books on the channel I think in quite some time, or at least I've not made one specifically on books, but lots of things to update on, lots of information that I want to present. The topic of this book will be centered around how I personally annotate or tab or mark up my books and what I do to leave the book with some semblance of meaningful knowledge. I think my overall goal with reading is to partake in a slow action that you have to meaningfully engage with. And so I think my thing is just I go about it very intentionally, if that makes sense. Also, before I started, I wanted to say I have a new addition to, I guess, my reading thing. Recently, I got a Kindle, and it is the Kindle Paperwhite in denim, and it is waterproof, and I like that it's blue, and I only have a clear case on it. I'm not doing anything too crazy with it, but I really was debating on getting one for a while, and I kind of bounced between different options because I know there's a Kobo, there's Books, BOOX, but me personally, I just think the Kindle format is a lot easier. There's a lot of capabilities for it towards libraries and checking out ebooks, and there's like the direct connection from like things like Libby and I think Hoop something over to Kindle. Also, though, I just am familiar with it because I've had the Kindle app on my phone for quite some time, and so I also had another avenue of just reading. I don't know. I kind of debated on it for a while, but I was like, I know it's something that I will use, so I want to get it. And I think I grappled with the idea of it because I think the way I've put myself out into the world is like, oh, I love physical media. I like having things physically, but I don't know. I think there definitely can be a balance between it. And also, I think with a Kindle, there's a lot of workarounds where you actually get to have the copy of what you are like reading, rather than it being up to Amazon. Because I do know Amazon has had an issue with Kindles where they will remove books. And I think it's just kind of an issue in general where content doesn't necessarily really belong to you just because you purchased it, but it just exists for you to use it, but then it can be taken away. I think a good example of that as well is like with Steam and like video games and stuff. Like if you buy a video game, then it's not really your video game, that like not your copy to own. It is just a game that you have downloaded in your library. I hope that makes sense. I don't know the complete details of that, but there's a lot of workarounds for that for the Kindle, and so everything I have on there is something that is going to be on there, regardless of whatever the firmware is. And so, yeah, that's it. Nothing too shabby, but it's also really cost effective, I think, for me because I personally have like a really long TBR and like I'm constantly in bookstores, but I've been refraining from buying books because I'm like, I don't need to buy all these books. I also can just access them on my Kindle through various websites that I will not disclose upon. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I don't think I have much else to say. I like it mostly because it's waterproof. I go to the gym, and so I'm like low-key trying to bring it with me when I go to the hot tub so I can just read. And also it's a lot easier on my eyes, and I like reading in bed, and so it just makes my life a little bit easier. But I think I've definitely figured out a balance between physical books as well as using an e-reader, and so not a big deal. I like the purchase. I've had it for about 2-3 weeks, and I have enjoyed the process so far. There's nothing too shabby about it, nothing too crazy. It works fine. Obviously it's used, there's some like kind of finicky parts to it, but I think that's just stuff that comes with like it having already been used, but also not necessarily a big deal. Again, though, I do like technology like this that only has one purpose, and its only purpose is reading. So all is well. I think that's it for my Kindle thing. I will chat on about books now. Also, by the end of this video, I do want to talk about the books that I've been reading recently and also what I'm currently reading and how I juggle reading different books and that kind of thing. Because I am, like, my very bad habit is that I cannot focus on one book at a time. I will always hop between books. But yeah, I'll talk about that later. For now, we're going to be talking about my reading system. Sorry if I'm kind of reading off of here. I think the way I write things out feels a lot more articulate than when I just like have it coming off the dome. But books always tell a story. The whole intention of literature is portrayed in how information is weaved together to create a written piece of art. In my English class, I think 2 months ago, I was introduced to the concept of the death of an author and how it is necessary to allow space for the reader's interpretations to live. In writing and displaying like your own writing and your art and all that jazz, you lose control as new perspectives consume it. That was a really interesting concept to me. That's why I reference it now. I think the whole intention of writing is just to like have it out in the world, let other people consume it. I think with me, I really want to divulge in creative writing, but I've always very much written about things that have been more personal to me. And so whenever I write things like that, I find that I have a hard time letting it be what it is for other people. I think a part of me still kind of struggles with over explaining things, as I'm doing right now. I'll move on. Anyways, basically, I'll be talking about how I annotate, why I tab and what I necessarily tab, what materials I use, and how to gain meaningful information from what you read. I'm going to start off about talking about tabbing. So I will give you examples of how I've tabbed things in a way that I don't think is very effective and versus other versions of when I've annotated and tabbed things. Keep in mind, I don't always annotate or tab things, or I don't always do that because it's very dependent on what I read. I would say recently I read The Summer I Turned Pretty, the first book, and that was not something I needed to annotate or tab because I didn't think that book needed that necessary like diving into because it was such like a straightforward young adult like romance novel. It was just very straight to the point. So it wasn't something I really felt the need to like kind of focus on super like intentionally. But then there are other books where I'm like, okay, there's clearly something more to this. There's something that I want to see from this. I have predictions, I have thoughts, I have that kind of thing. I will give you an example of bad tabbing for me personally. This is the picture of Dorian Gray, or my copy of the picture of Dorian Gray, that I got in 2022 or 2023. So it's been a long time. I think I started this early 2023 and then I finished it late 2023. So you could tell this book was hard for me to get through. But actually, The Picture of Dorian Gray is a fantastic book, and I'm rambling. As you can see, I have so many tabs in here that it's like unreal. Like, what did you need from this? And like, I think why I would say this is not really like a good way to tab is because I think you could just underline or cross things or like circle things or that kind of thing rather than rather than tab everything. Because for me, the way that I interpret tabbing is like you are making a physical point where you are trying to come back to this. So it's like you're physically making space to come back to this point in the book. And so I find that I tabbed a lot of very flowery language and a lot of prose and a lot of really beautifully written stuff because it was beautiful, not because I really would ever want to look back at them. That's why I would say this is not really good tabbing. Obviously, tab however the fuck you want, but me personally, I just don't think this is really effective for me, and I think there's very little of this book that's not a good statement. There was not so much of this book that needed to be tabbed, in my opinion. And I say that because I'm going to reference two other books that I have tabbed and annotated through. The Constellations of Philosophy by Alan Devine, as well as First Love by Ivan Turgenev. The reason why I tabbed I mean, look, this book is really quite short, but I didn't tab as much. I could count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 tabs throughout this whole like 100 page book. I think with this book, I only really necessarily felt like tabbing when I thought that this had something to do with the plot and something to do with how it was going to move forward and what lesson it would learn. Basically, First Love by Ivan Turgenev, I think it kind of talks a lot about the heartaches and the plight of being in love for the first time, and also being in love with someone you really shouldn't be in love with, and the way that it kind of consumes you and all that jazz. It's a fantastic book by the way. Great story. But anyways, and so I really only necessarily tabbed things that I thought were super significant that I would want to look back on. I also tabbed like really significant quotes for me that I felt kind of detailed a lot of the things about the main character. So like I said, this book kind of details a lot about first loves and how hard those can be. And one thing that I tabbed was this like big bulk of a passage. At that moment I would, I think, gladly have given up my life if only that could end her grief. I looked at her, and still not understanding why she was so unhappy, conjured a vivid image of how suddenly, in a paroxysm of ungovernable grief, she had walked into the garden and fallen to the ground as though mown down. Anyways, with this book, there are all kinds of lessons about love, which is why I tabbed this very intentionally and very minimally, but I'll keep this in mind. Tabbing and annotating are very different to me. I'll give you my final example of the Constellations of Philosophy and why I tabbed this one the way that I did. This book is basically kind of a nonfiction, I guess. I'm pretty sure it's a nonfiction actually, but it's a philosophy thing. This book had a lot of different lessons, and it divulged into a lot of different philosophers and their beliefs and their thoughts and what that meant and what that correlated to in a modern way. And so there's a lot to learn from this. And so I tabbed a lot more of the things because I was learning new concepts of philosophers that I was more so unfamiliar with, and then able to kind of divulge more into it and kind of relate it over to things that were more comprehensible to me. And also with this book, another thing that I did was I used these transparent tabs. I don't really care for transparent tabs, sticky notes, or not transparent tabs, transparent like sticky notes. I don't care whatever I use. I just thought this would be fun to use, so I got them. But anyways, I, at the end of each like chapter or each segment, because this book was kind of broken up into different segments and different philosophers per segment, if that makes sense. At the end of each segment, I would kind of take notes on what I just learned and what information was just presented to me and what I thought was most important. This helped a lot when I was actually note-taking about the book to kind of gain more knowledge upon it. So that's my other example of good tabbing. I think these were very healthy ways for me to tab. And I would say when I first started reading, I found myself, when I first started reading seriously again, back I think freshman or sophomore year, when I started reading seriously again, I found myself kind of gravitating towards the aesthetic of it. I was just tabbing for the love of the game. Like, I wasn't tabbing with any rhyme or reason. I was just like, oh, these colors associate with the cover, and I want to like deck out my books to prove that it was read and it was well loved. But I think you can do that in a lot more of an intentional way. Now I want to talk about annotation. Okay, now I want to talk more about annotations. So while in that other book I did use like the sticky notes to kind of consolidate my feelings and my thoughts on each chapter and like different very significant things, most books I usually just write all over the margins what I'm thinking about. For example, I recently started Masks by Fumiko Enchi, and this is very lovely so far, by the way. It's a very intriguing book. I'll talk more about that later actually, because I wanted to talk about that. But I just get all up in like the margins. I react to things. I kind of specifically point out like passages in that way. I think writing all over your books and just kind of using them, because it like they're mine. Like I like to kind of beat up my books and kind of get all over them. I wish I had this book still in my possession, but I did gift it to someone. Um, but I had a copy of The Thing Between Us, and I drew all over the margins because that book had a lot of descriptive stuff, and I drew in those margins different things that kind of correlated with the settings of the book. Things like that. That just kind of make the reading process more fun. I like to react. I like to be like, lol, what the fuck? I like to be like, oh, this is weird. Why did he say this? I like to underline words that I don't know. That kind of thing. That's kind of how I go about annotation. I'm not super deep about it because at the end of the day, I'm trying to have fun as well while I read. Like, I'm trying to be engaged with what I'm reading. I'm trying to take away something from what I'm reading. And so I just kind of have some fun with doodling and writing all over the margins and reacting to it in real time. I will say though, I do think I get a little bit different when it comes to nonfiction. I'm currently reading The Biology of Desire and Why Addiction is Not a Disease. I've talked about it very briefly before, but I do think this one's a little bit different because it's all information based. But there are very different things that I like take note of. Like, for example, this is a diagram of the brain and like different parts of the brain that kind of correlate with why addiction affects your brain and how it affects your brain. And so these different things get correlated to things that are kind of more comprehensible. Like, I would say, for example, there are the nucleus accumbens, and they send out a bunch of outputs to other parts of the brain, and then it got over here compared over to when dopamine is sent up to the accumbens, and it's like the pleasure circuits, but it's more so the intense pursuit of goals. Like, for example, chocolate cheesecake, pastry puffs, desserts, a flash in the pan, things like this. I think this book makes that very comprehensible. But then there are a lot of the very neurological things that I find are really important to take note of and to kind of underline and all that jazz. So again, it's very dependent on each book that I read as well. But in general, I would say I annotate things that I find very meaningful and that I want to look back on, and that I feel like play a very important role in what I am reading. And then annotations are fun. Annotations are my honest first things that I'm thinking of as I write, and whatever else I write in there that is more bulky, like for example in the Constellations of Philosophy with the sticky notes, that is consolidations of what I'm thinking. That's pretty much it, I think. My overall advice in kind of trying to leave what you're reading with like something meaningful, or at least in addition to your experience, to the reading process, whatever else, I think it's just actually write out how you feel about the book. Write out what you think about the book. Write out how you think about the ending. I think just have somewhere that you consolidate your thoughts. No matter if you're writing like 2 sentences for it, or like 1 sentence, or you're writing a paragraph or an essay or whatever else. I think writing about it is what is so like necessary to the reading process. I think there's something very beautiful about like balancing consumption and creation. I think if you are going to be consuming a new perspective, a new mind, a new thought, all new things into your brain, you should also be able to kind of put that out into the world as well, into your own perspective on it. Like, for example, I just read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I didn't like the book. I really didn't like the book. And so I wrote a review on it on Letterboxd, or not Letterboxd, sorry. I wrote a review on it on Storygraph and Goodreads. They're the same review, but I'm on different platforms, whatever. But I wrote a review on it because then I ended up being able to consolidate some of my thoughts on it and be like, okay, this is my opinion on this book and how it was reading it and what I thought about it. And so I think just doing that allows yourself to kind of leave the book with some like meaning, with something important. important. And I would also say talk about it with people if writing isn't really quite your thing. Last night I had a whole long big conversation about books with a new friend, and so we just chatted a bunch about books that we have read before or books that we'd like to read. I think I specifically talked about the Midnight Library for quite some time with him about my critiques on it. And honestly, when you're talking about things like that with other people, you end up wanting to be able to consolidate it better. So you kind of just look back over the book. That's what I ended up doing. I looked back over the book and the quotes that I didn't like and things that I didn't like about it and what I did like about it and what, things like that, just to specify my critique. There's just something you can always gain from each experience that you have, whether it is a book that you didn't like or whether it's a book that you did like. I'd also say, when you read books that you don't like, you also know what you don't like, and then you won't pick it up in the future. So I guess go in with an optimistic mindset, because there's always something you can kind of gain from every little thing. And that's just kind of general, vague advice, I guess, but also with books. I think the last thing I want to talk about are the books that I'm currently reading. Oh, no, the books that I've read recently, the books that I'm currently reading, and how I kind of juggle and balance reading multiple books at a time and how I end up doing that. I'm going to start off with the books that I've read recently. I have been off my game with reading, but I'm kind of slowly getting back into it recently. Like I said, I finished The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. It is a library book, which is a little ironic, but I have it as a library book. And I also recently finished The Summer I Turned Pretty, book 1. I both rated those books very average. I think both of them were 3.5 stars. My big critique about The Midnight Library is it's trying to be more profound than it actually is. And I don't think I have much to learn from it. And I would also say, I think my big gripe with it is I think number one thing for storytelling and writing and things and fiction is you show, you don't tell. But this book kind of explicitly explains the main character's growth to you many, many times throughout the book. And I find that really insufferable. I think it's something I also saw in Normal People by Sally Rooney, which I did actually like. I did enjoy that book, but that book also did end up kind of plainly explaining things to you. And I think a big gripe that I have with books in general is when they feel the need to explain everything explicitly. I think I read a Substack article quite some time ago that was do authors think we're dumb or something like that. I don't think that's the exact name, but it was in that regard. It's oh, do authors think that we cannot actually understand this, because why do they feel the need to explain it so plainly? That's my gripe with this book, though. This is one of the big reasons why I didn't like it, and I didn't it just wasn't really anything that I enjoyed. But that's okay. I also know that it's just really not something that I have much to learn from right now, or much to learn from in general. I feel like I'm not really in a similar mindset to the main character either, and I just really couldn't find myself liking her or relating to her. But anyways, I'm done griping on the book. I'm done just going at it. I also recently read The Summer I Turned Pretty, the first book, Jenny Han. I rated it mid because it was also very incredibly average, and also very incredibly not memorable, I would say. I think the thing is with this book, very easy to read, very, very easy to read, but I just got bored so often, so I would just stop reading it and then pick it up later when I was I just gotta finish it. And it's when you're at that point where you're just oh, gotta sludge through this book, it's not quite fun. But I would say I enjoy the show. The book just doesn't have the same charm to it because there's not Lola Tongue, and I think Lola Tongue as the main character in The Summer I Turned Pretty just does the character so much justice, and it makes the character someone I root for, but I don't think the book does it for me. But anyways, those are the books I finished recently. Okay, currently I'm reading 3 different books. I'm reading Mass by Fumiko Enchi. I hope I'm saying that right. And I'm also reading The Biology of Desire by Mark Lewis. And I'm also reading a light novel, but I will not be divulging the name of that. But I will say, the reason why I'm able to balance reading multiple books at once is because they are so drastically different. The Biology of Desire is a nonfiction, and it talks a lot about the neurological stuff and our brain processing and that kind of thing, and also about addiction. And so it's just a very far off topic from something like Mask by Fumiko Enchi that is very much about Japanese history, Japanese literature, about like these different women and these different relationships between women, the women in this book as well as men, and also mask and facade and manipulation and that kind of thing. Like there's a very sinister feeling to this book that I really quite enjoy. But again, very drastically different to the nonfiction book. And then the other book that I'm reading, the light novel, also very different writing style. It's written very plainly because it's a light novel, and light novels are typically written out because they intend to be adapted into manga or anime. And so it's written very plainly. The writing, or it's written very straightforward, but the writing is really enjoyable. The writing is fun. I think the plot is fun. Kind of. I can't divulge. I won't be divulging. So, anyways, sorry for being vague. But again, the writing style is super different. So, there are so many differences to the way that these things are written and the genres and the topics upon it that I find it easy to differentiate them all in my brain. And so, I'm able to pick up each book at different times and read it and still not get any information muddled. I think my brain is good at separating things like that. And so, yeah, I think that's it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. I love talking about books always. You guys are really fantastic and absolutely the best, and I appreciate you guys. Yeah, have a good day.